How does a person answer why something happens?
When you look at the findings in different fields,
Scant is the part of life in which we live.
To attain the highest values.
I mean, how deliberate, how conscious are you of that branding and that approach? And like, how much time do you spend thinking and working on that elements of your business?
I would have to say I don't think a lot, because I think it's just embodied. Like that's just how I show up, I think. Yeah, I haven't necessarily I mean, I have my whole dashboard where I'm like, what are my, value, brand values and my personal values and honesty and integrity and, process over perfection and all that stuff. And so I think showing it to people too, and it just is very permission giving for them when they see me showing things in process, or I'm like, here's my messy dashboard and here's something I'm still working through. And here's why I still think there's friction here. And here are the parts that are working and not working. And, I think people seeing me in process gives them permission to be in process too. But that's kind of how I've, in some ways, it's like a coping mechanism for perfectionism. I think that if I call out where I know the edges are, you can't criticize me. It's like, I know this is very imperfect and here it is in all its imperfect glory. And I think that's just kind of how I've always, maybe that's just how I've coped with that fear of being perfect. It's easier to just name it and be like, well, it's phase one, here we go.
Exactly. It's very like Eminem and 8 Mile kind of approach. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a podcast you did earlier this year, I think, where you talked about like the pressure of the pressure some people feel to be the expert, and you said this really great thing in that you was like, it's just showing up and being helpful. And it feels like that's really what we've just been talking about now. It's like that's your approach, and it's imperfect, and it's genuinely valuable and helpful, and that's kind of the attitude. So you're saying it's like you embody that. I think that's kind of what you mean, right? It's just a mindset.
Yeah, I think people pick up on that. They're just like, I don't necessarily like call myself a Notion expert. It's like people have seen my face enough and they're on the YouTube channel. And so, people call me the guru or the princess or whatever. It's very bizarre. But I think what I struggled with was I didn't just want to be known as like, oh, I just do Notion tutorials. But I hope what I do is so much more than that. It's helping people get that, again, that peace of mind, that workflow piece of just, that feeling of having your shit together. I think that's something so much of us struggle with, right? You're like, if someone saw behind the scenes, it's the total, hope I'm allowed to say the S word. Of
course,
I didn't really check with you. I think everyone feels like a little bit of a shit show behind the scenes, and we're sort of afraid to acknowledge that and show that. And so when someone realizes or that there are small things that they can do that can make a big difference, then people feel like ingratiated. They're just like, oh my gosh, I get some of the coolest comments on YouTube. Just, you make me, like, each of your videos makes me 10% better every day. Or I get random love notes from someone just being like, hey, I can't afford your course, but like, I just wanted you to know how much your content has impacted my life. And as much as I've had amazing clients that I've worked with, I can only work with a few at a time. Suddenly, to have some content that scales, you're hearing way more of that feedback. And I'm like, okay, it's a tool, but it is actually changing people's life. And so I can't argue with that. Like, that feels pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing external motivations. And I want to dive into some of the internal ones that you've touched on. That's a good segue into that. But before we do that, so you, I had a thought. Okay, we'll come back to that. Let's talk about motivation, because I think this is such a good point, because you've been saying you've been doing this for 3, 4, 5 years. It's only kind of recently that you've started to see this real traction, and I think that's true for so many people, right? It's like this 10 years to an overnight success thing.
Yes.
I feel like I say that on every single episode of this podcast, because it's like true for every single guest. So what are some of the things that I'll mention a few, because and maybe you can elaborate on these. Like, to me, the answer to that is internal motivation, right? You have to, before you got all these great love letters from people like telling you how much they've impacted their lives, you had to find that within, right? To like keep going and putting out stuff. And You've said this a couple times now. I love this. You're obsessed with human potential. And you talked about like your brand of joy is that you just love people and like seeing them like reach that potential. So I relate to that a lot, but how does that impact you and how has that motivated you?
Yeah, I think it's like motivation isn't something you can it's like you can't control the things that just naturally motivate you, I think, right? There's going to be things that when I see the like spark that goes off in someone's eyes when they're like, oh, I can do this or whatever, like to me that is fuel, right? I can't help that. So there's something about that connection, and I think a lot of this stuff is patterned from like before you're 5 years old. Like these sorts of things are, deeply embedded in us. And so I think with the Notion stuff, it was a transition from that one-on-one work where, okay, there's, really only 3 to 5 clients at a time that I could work with, because most of my clients were 3-year projects or more. Like some of the clients that I'm working with, I've been working with for 2 to 4 years, right? And I really get to know them super well. I connect with them and we are off to the races. So this is a very different thing where someone is maybe rapidly consuming your content and then they're off and they're doing their own thing. So, and then suddenly you're doing that at scale where, tens of thousands of people are watching your stuff or showing up on office hours. And so suddenly, it's like a different capacity or a different scale. So it was just a lot of change all at once. I guess I'm used to that. Just like, just another phase. Here we go. Let's see where this goes. But it was so fast, like my Twitter followers doubled, YouTube just exploded. And so suddenly I did have to deal with more connection. Like suddenly people want to be more connected with you, or there's just more inquiries coming in. So it was like, oh, okay, what does connection look like at scale? Can you do that? Can you scale that? But yeah, for me, I am very motivated by seeing someone get over that hurdle of like, whether it's their own internal blockers, right? The mindset stuff that keeps them from taking that next step. I'm like, if there's one tiny nugget that I could share with them that just like gets them to that next level, that is super motivating for me. That's definitely why I get out of bed.
Yeah. So I guess, how do you see that happen now, or how can you influence that now, where you have less opportunity to be one-on-one with people because of the scale of it, right? How can you still make that change that you get a deeply gratifying feeling from?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I think a big part of it with the course would be that community element, right? Like, and I think that's why I needed to open that up. I wasn't sure if Notion Mastery was the course that needed the community, because I have other, like, it's not the first course I've ever made, and it's not the last course I'll ever make. Like, there'll be like high-end coaching programs, there'll be whatever happens next. And so I don't know what the lifespan is of this course or what it's going to look like. I know it's impacting people. It's been amazing. But originally the forum, it was sort of like a Q&A style forum where it's like, you're basically asking Marie and then Marie answers you, right? But it's inside of Notion, which is fine. The more questions that popped in, I'm like, oh, I need to fill content to explain that, right? And so that didn't really give me a place other than my feedback form to see, well, where are people, where are their lives changed and what has changed as a result of doing this? So I think opening up the community was a chance to have people share what they're working on. Lots of people like will tweet at me and stuff and be like, oh, I'm going through the course, or at Instagram. I love seeing people share an Instagram, photo of their laptop where they're like, Christmas present to me. I bought myself the course. Like, this is so fun, right? So those little moments do pop up on social media and things like that. So it's finding those ways to make sure that you keep your eye, or your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the course, and just make sure people feel satisfied. And,
I love that idea that it becomes this almost like content engine for you. It's like, oh, I need to make something on that. You must have this like never-ending pipeline, basically, of ideas and content.
The hardest part is really prioritization. Like, what's the best next piece of content to make that would do, like, that has so much leverage, because when you create it once, you can post to YouTube and the course, all that good stuff.
How do you? I heard you say it on another show once. Is like it's tempting to want to do things that are like maybe fun and like, maybe you want to fiddle with the like a dashboard and approve something, but it's not the highest leverage thing you could be doing. Like, how do you discipline yourself to like identify that thing and work on that thing, even though it might not be like your most favorite thing.
So like where the high leverage thing is like not the exciting thing to work on, but it's probably the thing that you should do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's probably a result of just all the, coaching programs and things that I've done that when you're surrounded with people who are always thinking in terms of long-term leverage, what does your life balance look like? Do you want to be working all the time? So sometimes we have to do hard things that are going to free up time down the road. And I think that changes on a daily basis, right? And I think there was a video I released that was about managing your tasks based on project energy, right? And just thinking of this week, I don't have energy for that project right now, or I can't, I don't have the capacity to focus on this project that's really important, but I'm just not feeling it this week. So I'm going to get this next most important thing over here. And just giving yourself permission on a daily and weekly level to make those shifts, as long as you've got the long-term vision in mind, but knowing that from a day-to-day level, we don't always have a consistent, high energy. So I think that's another thing maybe with the course too, is just giving people permission that we're not looking to be like super high performers all the time. Like that's not realistic. We all have lives and people have kids and there's COVID and depression. There's like all sorts of things people are dealing with that you never really know what's happening behind the scenes. So it's just like noticing your energy, noticing what you need, and giving people permission to design for that. But I do try to think of what are the things I can do now or soonish, such that everything else becomes easier afterwards. So what's my future self going to thank me for?
Yeah, that seems like just half the battle is identifying those things and knowing what they are, and then forcing yourself, like you say, in those moments to work on them.
I think asking the question, like, what's the cost of, like, what's at stake by not doing this? I think is a good question to ask, right? So just checking in.
The Tim Ferriss sort of, what's it called? I forget what he called it. It's like, what if I don't do this thing? What is that going to look like in 5 years? I remember what we were saying earlier. I want to come back to that quickly. And it's important because I had a guest on the show who made a point of emphasizing this right at the beginning. It's like, people can come on podcasts and you sound like really smart and together and figured it out and all of that. But it's like, but no one really does. That's kind of the secret. Everyone's kind of winging it. And I think you said when you were talking about, like, you embody that and it's like this authenticity that comes through and saying, like, look, my stuff's changing all the time and I'm learning new things, and makes it easier for people to connect with you and their journeys. What are your thoughts on that and this notion that everyone's just winging it?
Yeah, again, I think you never really know what things look like behind the scenes, or if someone has a supportive partner or not, right? If you have a trust fund or not. Like, there's just so much that you never really know what people have to work with. And so I think as much as possible, I like to share more of that honest side of, like, this week you can see this was like a very low productive week and I didn't check the things off my list. And I really try to reiterate that to folks, especially even in the content. I think they're surprised by it, but just that we're not robots, we're not machines. We are human beings and we are flawed, and we overestimate what we can do sometimes, and we, underestimate what we can do in a year. And so I think I wouldn't say I'm winging it. Like, I think I'm making do with the knowledge that I have. And sometimes it's easy to like attribute it to luck. Sometimes I say, like, with this Notion stuff, it feels like right place, right time. A rocket was taking off and I was like, I guess I'm going to strap myself to that rocket. Like, woo. And it partly does feel a bit like luck, but I've had some people say, like, yeah, sure. And if your years and years of experience and the choice to double down on it and the decisions that you made, that it just, timing was right. But there's a lot of circumstances, of course, that led up to that being able to happen. If I hadn't done all that video, like doubling down and getting over my fear of speaking, I wouldn't have been ready to do that. So it's like luck meets preparation, and there's always a bit of a shit show behind the scenes. Totally. And it's like, that's exactly what I mean by winging it. Like, it's the shit show behind the scenes, and then a little bit of things in place and you got to be an organized and productive person, right? And like deal with the thing right in front of you. But I think, like, just what you were saying as well, like the steps that led up to that, I'm pretty sure and feel safe in saying that wasn't part of the plan that you had back when you were doing those things, right? That's kind of there is no master grand plan in most cases, and you just
you do the thing in front of you, you do it the best you can, and then grab the opportunities when they come.
And I think that's why too, when I do planning and stuff, it's like, nobody predicted, I had my, 2020 planning video in January 2020, right? And then it's like, there's obviously so much is out of our control, but there are things that you can plan for, or that you can tap into, like, how do I want to feel on a day-to-day basis? Or how do I want my life to look like? Who are the people? Like, just painting that picture and getting a little bit more feeling oriented, I think can help you as you're like, well, are these projects that I'm putting on my plate actually supporting that goal over there? If I want more spaciousness, I need to focus more on leverage and less on these one-on-one projects. Like, it gets easier to make better decisions, I think, when you know, like, how you want to feel, what you want things to look like. How I'm going to get there, I don't necessarily know. I didn't know that Notion was going to take off in this way. It's like being ready for the opportunities when they present themselves. That if I had been overbooked beyond capacity, I wouldn't have been able to have had time for working on the course too, right? So it's like a little bit of just strategic, okay, I see some high leverage opportunities here, and knowing how to prioritize.
Which comes down to those things, like you say, like the feelings, I think values as well. Like I think you touched on those earlier as well. Like those, what I find, this was more like probably in the last year that I've realized, is that from a goal setting perspective, those things are way more important to have as goals than like the financial ones or metrics based ones. Those quantitative ones are the ones like I often just be like, oh, well, whatever, like that didn't pan out, but like you even kind of forget about them. But it's the values ones and the feelings and that like just, I think, dictates so many of the decisions you end up making.
Big time.
Yeah.